Join us at Denver Community Media every fall for Harvest Your Creativity, a month-long celebration where we offer free, hands-on media workshops and events designed to help you learn new skills, meet other creatives, and just hit record.
All right, we are live with Intro to Color Correction and DaVinci Resolve. Welcome, everyone. I am Austin, and we are going to do a quick dive into some of the color grading tools in DaVinci. For those of you who don't know, DaVinci Resolve was built as a color grading tool first and foremost. It was the first digital color grading tool, and yeah, that's kind of what they built their name on. And then Blackmagic Design bought them out and added in all of the editing tools, Fairlight Audio, Fusion Compositor, all the stuff that we now get today in DaVinci. So yeah, that's kind of where we are. But we're going to just take a look specifically at the color page and some of the color tools here. So let me just go ahead and share my screen. And there we go. So here's a shot from a series of interviews we did with veterans 2 Novembers ago. I guess two Novembers ago. Yep. And so we have this gentleman here, and this one's pretty well exposed. This has kind of already been balanced, but we're going to just kind of get into what are the different tools in here? How do they work? How do you read the scopes? What do they all do for you? So the layout here in DaVinci Color Correction is you have your viewer. All the windows in DaVinci are going to have a viewer. So you get your viewer here, program, preview, all that. But on the color page, you just get the one viewer here. And that is where we can see all our corrections, everything that we make. And as you're going through, you'll see this little sparkly guy up here. And you can turn the effects on and off. Right now, there's nothing on, so you're not going to see it. But that's a great way to A/B and make sure what you're correcting, what you're doing, you actually like, and it's what you want to see. And we are going to hold for just a second for that doorbell. Oh, we're good. All right. So next to the viewer here, I'm going to turn it back on for now. We have our nodes where you can build out what a lot of people call a node tree. And this is kind of DaVinci's version of layers. Those of you who come from After Effects or Premiere, using adjustment layers, different layers. In DaVinci, you use what are called nodes, these little blocks here. And you can make a whole bunch of those. We can just throw tons of them out. Some of the big projects do get very deep with their nodes. We're going to stick with one right now and just a few today. But how this works is this side over here, this little dot, is your input. This is the original video that you're editing. This is what the system is getting to work on. And then we can take it from here into our node, and you can create a whole bunch of nodes. These little this top set of the triangle and square are your actual video input and output. So you get your input, then you get your output, and then here is your final output. So this is what's going to get rendered and exported. Yeah, so it kind of works. You just make a whole bunch of these. And then the bottom, the blue here, is your alpha channel, which we're not going to mess with today. That's a little bit more in depth, but that's how you would transfer masks from layer to layer, or like a chroma key or anything like that. You would transfer between that blue channel. But for today, we're going to stick on the video channels here. Cool. So yeah, we have that. We have the viewer. Here's how you turn off and on all of your effects. And then when you're on the node level, you can actually turn on and off each node by just clicking on the number here. And that's really valuable if you like. I like to split up my effects onto different nodes, so you can kind of A, B, and see what's working, what's not working. Make it a little easier there. So. Because sometimes you just look at it so long that you're like, oh yeah, this is great. And you're like, wait, something looks funny. Where did I go wrong? And you have to step back and backtrack. So I always keep things separate. A thing that's important to know with the nodes is they are, the earlier nodes take precedent. So when I make an effect in this first node, it's actually putting that output, that video with that effect as like a solid output into the next one. So the second node is not working off of the original signal. It's working off of whatever signal was affected here. Yeah, so that primarily takes place with LUTs, which we'll get into a little bit later. But when you do a LUT, it throws out all the extra data. And so if you do it the first thing, you lose all the data up front. You usually want to do it last, so you can make adjustments with all the extra data and then throughout the lens. So yeah, kind of a neat way to be able to do that. But it's just important. Like I didn't know that for the longest time. And so I was doing it backwards and losing all this info. Like, oh, my grading's it's not looking any better for all the extra stuff I should have. So yeah, definitely good to have this here. So that's nodes. On the left, we have our gallery. And a lot of these you can show and hide by clicking on the title up top. We have the gallery here. And what that does is you can store screenshots. So right here, I'll hit grab still. And those do a multiple things. So one, it's a preview. So if I come to the next clip and hover over, it'll apply the look from that screenshot. So it saves all the nodes and effects from that screenshot, which is nice. So it's the easy way to copy things over and then also to preview. Oh, would this look also look good on the next clip? So it saves all those. And when you do want to apply it, you drag over here and you can see it added all those nodes I had. There's no effects on them, so it doesn't do anything, but good thing if you have like a template too. Like I usually use the same like 5 node structure, so I can just copy it over up front. So that's nice. What it also does is it gives you the image wipe here. So you can click on that. And then you can kind of compare the shots and, if they were from a similar scene, you could make sure that they match and look the same. So that's what we would do there. But yeah, turn that off for now. So that's that area. Down here, you have your gallery, and not your gallery, your thumbnail and timeline. So they call it clips. I don't know, I always call it thumbnails, but this is basically a thumbnail of each clip on the timeline. So you can just click through real quick and edit different ones. You can also turn on the timeline and you can see it laid out here. I usually just keep that off because I just try to get more screen space, and having the thumbnails is enough. So I do that, just click through, do all those. And then below that, we have our main color correction wheel. So this is where you do, 90% of your color grading. Color correction is on the primary wheels here. You have the bottom slider does exposure, and then the top set does color. So we'll come back to those as well, but just kind of doing a quick overview now. On a screen, if the screen were slightly bigger, it would also squeeze in the S curve in the middle here between the scopes and there, but it like automatically adjusts for your screen size. So it only shows one or the other right now, but typically you would have all these pieces would show in one, and then all this would show in the middle. Like you could toggle between it would be your middle window. My screen size is off, I guess. And then let's take this and scroll over. So then on the bottom, we have, I want to go, there we go, scopes. And these are really important. Scopes are really important to edit your color correct your videos for a few reasons. One is what I talked about earlier, where like you get used to seeing the look and it may actually be off, but our eyes just become adjusted to it. So scopes help keep us in check. It's like, wait a second, this is saying it's off. The other big thing is there's a legal range as to what most TVs will show, and anything brighter than that will just become pure white. Anything darker than that will become pure black, and you lose all the detail. And that's just important because maybe you did have like a little bit that people need to be able to see, and it shows up on a Mac screen, but it's not going to show up on a TV because a lot of times the computer screens show more range than a TV does. So it's good to be able to know, I can see it here, but most viewers won't be able to see it. And the scope tells you that. Scope tells you that, yeah. So anything over 100s, a lot of TVs now show more than they used to, but you still run the risk of it getting cut off over 100 or under 0. Also, every screen is different. So if I edit on this screen and then look at it on this screen, it's going to look totally different. And look at it on your screen, it's going to look totally different. So the scopes help us account for that. And like a full color suite, like this is all somebody does full time. Every screen is going to be calibrated to match. But in the real world, that's not the way it is. So using scopes is our way to account for, oh, it looks really green here, but it looks perfect here, and then really blue over there. Well, what does the scope say? Is it just our screen is off, or is it actually the video itself? Right. So but as long as you're within 100, 0 to 100, you're usually good. You're usually good, yeah. And we'll get into more some like targets to aim for different parts of the video. But yeah, 0 to 100, you're pretty good. I wouldn't go to 100 unless it's a direct light source. So like the sun is actually in the shot, or a light bulb is in the shot. Usually you wouldn't be at 100 except for on those. So like if you had like the bright white wall, that might be at 90, 95. If it had good light on it. So like the brightest thing in your image, unless it's a direct source of light, is gonna be like 90, 95. So it's at least where I aim for and find that it works. Sometimes it's even lower. So, yeah. So yeah, and we'll go. So this is kind of the first scope I look at. This is our Luma waveform. You can go through the scopes by clicking here, and you get parade, waveform, vector scope, histogram. This is probably the one I use the most, is the waveform. And I always change. They usually default it to be showing all kinds of. Oh, it's not loading right now. They usually have it show in color, and that's just too distracting. Like, let's just keep it simple. What we want to see is the brightness. And they'll add in like the different color channels in here, and this gets really, there's other ways to see that, and there's just no reason to overlap. So that's just preference though. I usually do the white channel, which is luminance, brightness, and then turn off the colorize, because you can see it kind of looks a little different there. It is a good way to double check white balance, because if something's supposed to be white, that section on the graph should appear white and overlap. And if it's not, you'll see like, oh, the blue's peeking out. But again, you can check that other ways. So I like to just use the waveform, and this just gives me brightness. So 0 being, let's say, like the darkest part of the image, 100 being the brightest if there's a direct source, otherwise 90. And be careful if you're on a trackpad or magic mouse, you can just swipe this thing gone. So like there it is. Magic mice really aren't that great for editing. That's what I found out. They make it a little sloppy, and you get more functions with like a scroll wheel. So, yeah, and then these do read left to right. So this, left side of the image is the left part of the graph. He's this kind of chunk here in the middle. Yeah. And you can turn on through this little dot. So you can go down to display qualifier focus. And then that does what mine is, where it's got the teardrop. And then you can see, let me get out of that menu. It'll do a little circle on the graph over what I'm hovering. So if you're ever unsure, like, oh, what's this window at? That window's the bright part. And that's at 95. And since that's light shining through the window and not actually the sun, that's why it's not at 100. Yeah. Yeah. And you'll notice if I go to 100, some of these things you like, yeah, that's way. Take it up to 100 and it just starts to be too bright. It starts to lose detail. It starts to kind of bloom where you get that glowing effect. And that's what you kind of, if that's the style you're going for, but in like typical stuff, you don't want that. So I'm going to reset this. The next set of graphs I like to use are the waveform. Sorry, not the waveform, the parade. Some of them call it a waveform. It's just 3 waveforms, about 1 for each color channel. So you get red, green, and blue. For a good, normal, well-balanced image, they should be somewhat close, like somewhat matched. But if they match perfectly, then you're in grayscale because they're all offsetting each other. So like this is fine because obviously we still have a color. They're matching, but they're not perfect. Once they're perfect, it is just grayscale. So I guess let's just see. Actually, I never tried it. Yeah, you can see they become exactly the same when I pull out my saturation. So, but that's not what we want. But you do want them, generally balanced, because you can see when I really offset, like, oh, the blue's way bigger, and it shows. There are times where they won't somewhat balance, like the blue will be way bigger, the green will be way bigger. Usually those are the 2 that you see, sometimes red. That's if like, oh, it's a bright blue sky is most of your frame. The blue's going to be bigger because there's just that much more blue. If you're at a park, the green's going to be a lot higher. If you're at the ocean, you get that teal, sometimes just blue. And so those are times where like you use the context. Like ordinarily you don't want the blue way higher. However, in that you do. And if you try and balance it, it's going to look really weird. So yeah, so these are just a good way to get color balance. One thing to check too, outside of the overall balance, is if you have something that's, at the very bottom and should be just pure black, make sure that the bottom of all these graphs, whatever the lowest point is on this, it's probably this little poke down here. Those should all be completely matched, or you're not getting black, you're getting dark blue or dark green, whatever's higher, dark red.
So the lowest points on all 3.
It's nice to have a match if there's black if you don't have any black in your image, but usually you do, because there's going to be like a dark shadow that has no info. So it's generally safe to try and get the lowest point to match. And then same on the highest point. You generally want that to match. And what that does is just gives better color contrast. If the whites are white and the blacks are black, everything in between, just our eyes read it better, a little bit more clean.
And how do you adjust it if they don't match?
Yeah, so you'll use either the regular wheels or the log wheels, and we'll get into that.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So And then histogram just gives you a regular distribution. So it shows brightness as well, but it doesn't map it out with the image. It actually just takes how many pixels do you have that register at 10% brightness. Okay, and it's just a graph of how many of those pixels are at each level. So it's just a good way to see overall, like if I were shooting normally, you'd be like, oh, this one's too dark. But you look at the image and it looks fine because that's the way we lit it. But it's just a good way to get distribution. But again, I don't find them super helpful because it's literally just, oh, what if I had like, a completely black image and then a person walk through? Well, then everything's going to be down at 0 except for a little bit up higher. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So they just give you an idea. So it's another reference point, but I don't use it hardly ever. The one I do use a lot is the vector scope, and this shows hue and saturation. So you get your primaries here, red, blue, and green, and then the secondaries, yellow, cyan, and magenta. And then, so the little graph kind of goes out towards them, and the further it goes out, the more saturated it is. So you can see if let's go back here and boost the saturation, you'll see it grows a lot. And as I turn the colors, kind of can move it different ways. You can pull it, different colors. So we have that. But what I primarily like to use the vector scope for is if you go into settings and go to the bottom, you have show skin tone indicator. And so all human skin tone, regardless of how light or dark, should fall somewhere along that line. Maybe not directly over it, but like within 10 or 15 degrees of it. And so that's just good because, like, okay, if the wall in the background's a little inaccurate in what it actually looks like, nobody notices. But if the skin is extra blue, people notice. So it's a good way to just kind of keep check on that. Is it too yellow? Is it too red? His right now is sitting pretty center. But I find even if you're like off a little bit, it's still, yeah, it's, well, if you're off, so yeah, if you're off, it becomes noticeable. But let's say I shift him a little this way. He definitely, like, we can tell he's more blue, but it doesn't look too unnatural. And so, like, I find you can typically shift them a little bit off so he's not as centered anymore. Like even in there, that's maybe pushing it, but you could kind of in the middle of where we were and where it is now, it doesn't have to be perfect on the line, but it should fall within, like a little cone of that line. And it tends to be good. Sometimes you don't, sometimes you want people, look like they were at a rave or something. I don't know. But then this would do no good at all. But if you're trying to get accurate skin tones, I find it really helpful because, again, that's, those are things that people notice. If the skin tone's off, if the eyes are out of focus, people don't notice if the ear's out of focus, but if the eye's out of focus, you have a problem. So just those little things. So that's what the vector scope, I use that a lot just to double check people don't look sick. If you usually don't add a lot of blue or magenta because people just don't have blue or magenta in their skin tones. Every once in a while, if the image was really off, you would add that to bring it in. But typically you're just shifting between yellow and red in that orange zone and just minor shifts in there to bring skin tone in. Unless it's really off. But otherwise, if you're adding blue, you're just making them look sick or dead. So cool. So that's all the scopes. Do you have any questions on those?
Not really.
Okay, cool. Have you gotten into some of those before, or?
No,
Okay.
I opened this page. And
Yeah.
It's really intimidating. So I don't know if I need to adjust anything, but I've been wanting to make my face a bit better.
Yeah, it's always, you can always add just a little bit. Even if they're already like looking really good, just doing it like 5 seconds to just, expand the contrast that little smidge, set that white at 95 and that black at 0, adds just a little bit. And it's really noticeable how much a little can do in color. So
Will you
yeah.
cover like how to do, like if I adjust it, how to create templates, or is that like the node of what you're showing me?
Yeah, that's the main way.
How to save the color so that I can easily apply it to the next project.
Yeah, so good question. I don't go over into that too much in this outside of the gallery stills. And they do make it really easy. So you can actually export these effects and then import the other one. Okay. You can also, they actually have it. I'll just show you this real quick. You can command copy and then go over to the other one and paste it. Okay. What they have here, if you go to the little house down here, and then right click, you can do dynamic project switching, which allows you to have multiple projects open. And now I can open up that one's missing stuff. But basically up here, there would be a drop down and you could switch between projects and you can copy and paste between them, which is nice.
That's really helpful.
Yeah. And you can, like you see here, you can copy grade from current project, other project. So you could go in and pull it in that new project from this one. And you would just go in and pick this still or this, that clip.
Cool.
Yeah. So that is kind of,
Pretty much what,
yeah.
I was asking.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, so they do save, just their default way of saving these stills makes it really easy to pull stuff in. So yeah. Cool. So yeah, getting into some of the tools. I always start with exposure. Some people start with color balance first, but in my experience, I've just had better luck doing exposure than color balance. So I will start with the waveform. And I start with these wheels over here. So, the sliders under the wheels for brightness. And what they do is offset affects the entire image. So you'll see as I move up and down, just everything, the whole graph moves. It doesn't stretch or anything, it just moves. I don't use that very often for brightness. Lift does the bottom portion of the image. Gamma does the middle, and gain does the top. But the way that these work is they kind of mimic how you used to grade film, where you had to put the whole film strip in and soak it in a chemical bath for so long to adjust the color. And that's also the way our eyes see things. Like they don't adjust little pieces of the image. We see the whole thing as a whole.
Right.
And our pupils dilate for the overall picture, not for a section of it. So what these wheels do, and this is why I use these primarily, is this one is focused on the bottom, but you can see it still pulls on the top.
Right. Yeah.
So it adjusts the whole image, and that's what keeps it more natural.
Mhm.
It also makes this more of a juggling act, but it keeps it more natural looking. So you have lift for the bottom, gamma for the middle, gain for the top. So the order that I recommend doing this in is starting with lift, especially if it's already pretty close. If this image started up here, then I would start with offset, just to pull everything down and get it into a better spot.
Mhm.
But since it started pretty close, we're not even going to touch offset. We're going to skip to lift, and you generally set the bottom in because that just kind of sets the base for your whole graph and tends to adjust everything more. So I always start with the lift, and then I adjust, not the gamma. What am I doing? Then I do the gain. So I kind of set the bottom and the top first, and then adjust the middle within it. So yeah, so I always kind of do this. So we can go like there-ish. And then the gamma really works like an S curve. I don't know if you're familiar with those. So it's kind of this curve and you make points on it and you can adjust your image. And so the typical way people do it is they do it like this, which pushes the top up and the bottom down, and then you can adjust the middle. That's like a full S curve, but the way that the gamma works is almost like with one point and you're just pulling around. And so instead of being a linear, like moving up and down, it's actually like pushing the way it curves and expands around it. So that's kind of what a gamma does. It's basically just moving an S curve up and down.
That seems like you have a better opportunity to come out with like an accurate picture the way you want it. The gamma,
Yeah.
S-curve leaves more room for error.
Yeah.
Okay.
S curves are really powerful if you really practice them, but they're also less natural. And so it's really easy to invert. And like what you'll get with an S curve that goes wrong is the gradations come off. So instead of like, here's my shadow and it transitions into, like maybe it's the feathering of a building, shadows kind of like feather out when it's not harsh sunlight. Instead of feathering, it'll be like step, step, step.
Okay.
And that's where S curves get a little bit trickier. If you practice them enough, it's smooth. You can do them really smooth, but it's also easy to just mess that up.
Yeah.
And it's also easy to invert colors. If you accidentally cross points, then you start to invert. So I don't recommend S curves for your primary corrections. They're more of a secondary, which is where you isolate pieces and you want to work on a certain part of the image. Yeah. But they can be used as a primary. But yeah, you can see like if I cross here,
Right.
let's see, it's not letting me do it. Like I can cross back and we get all those weird inversions. I mean, you have to try to do that, but that's just kind of like an example of what can happen with them. So, but yeah, so we have our wheels and we pull up there. And then you kind of set that and then you can just set the gain. And what you'll notice is because they pull on each other, I may set one and then the second one, I set that and it messes up the first one. And then you have to go back and redo the first one. So it's that's why it's a juggling act, but it looks the most natural. So unless you're going for highly stylized, I find it to be the best way to do it. So I just go like that. And I usually try and look at faces when I do gamma, if they're like normal exposure, if it's not like a stylized look. I use gamma, usually try and get my faces where I want them. But it does affect everything. So you kind of look at the whole image. But that's just kind of the quick adjustments there. I think there's so many tools in DaVinci in color that it can get overwhelming. But the reality is I use this for 95% of what I do. And so if you just focus on these up front, like I think that's the starting point, is using these color wheels and sliders. And again, I think most colorists use these for a majority of what they do. It's only when they're like, let's say, oh my gosh, we wanted him to wear a brand color. He's supposed to be in a red shirt. That's when you get more time consuming, or you want to get really, really stylized. But for just making your base image look better, wheels and slider, that's all you need. So,
and then the dial above the slider is like to pull the image more in that color direction. So like the quadrant there.
Yeah. Yes, these are color wheels. So we'll actually jump into that next. So we'll go to parade. And yeah, so the color wheels, and they affect the same thing. So offset does the whole image. Gain does the top, gamma and middle, lift the bottom. I don't do the same order on this. I tend to just, look at how far off this is. So this is pretty well balanced to begin with. It doesn't need a whole lot. So I might do an offset adjustment. I, again, try and reserve that more if the whole thing is off. Maybe the white balance was off and there's a whole color cast across the entire image. But ordinarily, you can actually just get a nice little adjustment with just doing the gain at the very top. So I would usually do something like that. I could warm this up, kind of stuff like that. And then I'll use like lift more to adjust the shadows to make sure that and I'm primarily looking at this little section here. And the nice thing is I can actually hover over this and it gets the circle on each one of those. So I can see, okay, my blues, actually, these are pretty well balanced. The blue's maybe a teeny bit high and the green and the red's a little low, but not enough that I'm super worried about it. And so you can kind of adjust that. That's kind of how you get that pure black instead of dark blue or something. It's a little hard with lift because you can see lift is adjusting half of the image. So this is the one time where I'll use log wheels outside of log footage. Because they're really isolated and they work on just that lower portion. And so I'll do that to get my black, pure black, and my white, pure white up there.
And so the log wheels are just not pulling on as much of the image.
Yeah, the log wheels are more specific. And you can set what they do. So they still pull a little bit on the whole image. There's a little bit overlap, but it's not, it's like instead of pulling like this, it's like this. Right. And then you can actually set where they go. So I can set the log wheel to be, the range here is just the very bottom, and that's how I can really adjust that black level. So I can really isolate it, and then same on the top. I could really isolate the top. And this changes between nodes. So if I go to the next node, it does not have the same range, so that's nice. So you can actually use it to do different things on different nodes. But yeah, that's the only time. Log wheels are really for log footage. And you can use them on regular footage, but again, you get that. Is it too isolated? Is it making unnatural corrections?
What do you mean by log footage?
So log footage is a way of shooting in cameras that preserves more of the image data. So usually, like a camera, let's say, like I can see the bright light here and the darkest shadow under a chair, and let's say you could break that into 20 different steps. Cameras can only see maybe, now they can see more, but let's just say 10 of that. For a while is what digital cameras could see. So I can see that 10 steps. So that means if I expose in the middle, the 5 up top and the 5 below are all lost. So anything brighter is just pure white and anything darker is pure black. But I see all the data, but the camera doesn't. And then of course you can expose lower. And so maybe you just have the darkest part and then everything, the top half is all, or you could do the reverse. What log does is instead of doing the regular image contrast, it makes it really flat. So it pulls these parts that are maybe a little over and a little under within them all down to here. And then you expand it later and it gives you more choice on like, which part do I want to use? And more data in general. So just a lot more information. So, but you do have to, you have to color grade. You can just throw a LUT on, but it doesn't always look great. To just do that, you usually have to do it in some adjustments. So you do have to color grade, but it's going to be like a cleaner, more data, more color, more brightness and darkness. So, so that's what log footage does, and you spread it out later. We'll actually talk about how you normalize. It's called normalizing to make it look normal and then edit it. at the end of this. But yeah, it's just a way to get more out of your camera, basically. Yeah. And then, yeah, and so it extends a lot of cameras up to 12 or 14 stops instead of 10 stops. Yeah. Let's see. Yeah, they're designed specifically to work with that flat image and help spread it back out. So, yeah. And I have some log footage that will kind of show you what that looks like on too. So, yeah, so we can adjust all the color. So yeah, typically I would do my exposure on one and then go to the second and do my color balance. I want to get off the log wheels here. And anytime you see a little back wheel, that's how you reset the setting. Some of them you can also double click on. Like these ones, you double click next to it and that'll reset it. Yeah. And then you can also, if you want to reset everything, you can right click on the node and hit reset node grade, or you can right click just in the node graph and reset everything. So, and then again, you can, kind of A/B these effects. So we can go up here, and this one's kind of obvious, but if you want to see what you're doing or not, you can do it on the node level or on the whole image. So.
Because you turned the second one to magenta, it went to the third. The third
yeah, you'll see. Yeah, that's kind of how it processes. You'll see that now that third thumbnail is, but the first one has no effect on. So, yep. So when you go into the third, it is not working on this original image. It is working on the magenta image. So any data that you lost, one way I like to show this, let's just reset the whole thing. If I take my first node and let's say take out all the saturation and make this black and white, that's gone. I can't just go to the second node and turn up the saturation and get it back. So it's literally just throwing out that color data and it's not there anymore. So, yeah. Cool. So yeah, color. Again, I primarily can get away on, if it was a well shot image and I've set the black levels, I can usually get away with just a little correction in the gain. But if you really want to put the time, I'm also always going to come in and make sure that the black levels match, the white levels match, so that it's all balanced. And that just helps keep everything a little cleaner. And I'll go up sometimes and sample. This one's not, I guess this is probably should be black. So you can kind of sample and double check those. We could check, there's not a good white sample in here, but I might use this kind of little specular highlight on his thumbnail. That's pretty close, but you wouldn't want to say oh, that's not pure white, I need to fix, because it shouldn't be. If that were a little brighter, you might be able to pull off of that one, but that's a last case resort to sample off of a specular, because they're always going to be a little tinted for the most part. Yeah, so that is color and the color wheels. Some other easier ways I like to show you, I don't recommend using them because, again, they're kind of isolated. You don't have as much control, but if you're in a hurry, they'll help. Or sometimes there are images that are really tricky for some reason, and the wheels, even though they have more control, just hard to nail it. So I'll try these other tools. So the first one for brightness and exposure is contrast here. So that's exactly what, when I'm doing, setting my, what did I do? When I'm setting the exposure and I set the lift down and then I set the gain, I'm just manually doing a contrast adjustment. So you can do that all here, but you just don't get as much control. Right. So that's why I don't, and if you practice the wheels, it's not really a lot quicker either. So I don't do that. You can see it just spreads out the image. One thing that DaVinci has that other Premiere doesn't have built in is the pivot, which actually sets what you're expanding around. So right now you can see everything spreading out from about that 50 line right in the middle. I can adjust it to actually spread out from up higher. Now it spreads at a different point. So that's good if you're need to get contrast and adjust the exposure, and it works fine. You just don't get as much control. So that's why I don't use it a lot. Same thing on color. If you want to adjust the color, you have the temperature slider here. So you can make it's basically blue versus red. And I didn't change that, did I? So you can see the whole blue versus red. And green moves a little because they all interplay, but it's primarily the blue versus red. And then the tint is your magenta versus green. So it's basically red and blue versus green. So So you can do all the same controls, but again, now I'm limited to adjusting this on 2 different axes versus, going in the middle here and getting that control. Which obviously you wouldn't want that. Yeah. Yeah, because automatically, when I adjust here, it automatically pulls back on the other and everything. So that's just the wheels are a lot better. But sometimes if you're in a hurry, these work fine. I have hit some weird images where for some reason this just works better than the wheels. That may just be my deficiency on the wheels, but sometimes it just hits it a little. It's just the right spot that it just fixes it. So, and sometimes just taking the, it's nice to have the full control of the axes, but sometimes when you take it away, and you limit yourself, it forces you to kind of hit it in on a simpler way. So those are options. And of course, saturation down here to boost your saturation. If you shoot log, so when you shoot log, it takes out the contrast. Some of them also take out the color, not like to full, but they dampen a little bit. So you have to boost saturation to pull that back up as well. And sometimes, when you shoot log, camera manufacturers provide a LUT, which is a lookup table, which is an adjustment to make it look normal. And then some of those throw back in saturation and some of them don't. So it's just it's such a weird camera to camera. So Sony, in my experience, does not throw in much saturation. So you always have to boost saturation. Yeah. So just kind of a weird thing. And then you can look here. The vector scope has a similar thing. This image was shot in log. So we still have, you can see, I can pull down and I still have some data. If it weren't in log, I wouldn't be able to pull down at all. It would just be that hard line immediately. And actually this has been normalized. So if it were full log, that hard line probably wouldn't be there at all. You would have a full graph which shows you used to have more data to work with. But yeah, so once you get over that line, it does just goes flat. You lose everything. Vector scope doesn't work exactly the same way. I can boost the saturation, and that's at 100. And that's way oversaturated, and it's nowhere near the edge of that graph. So it doesn't quite work the same way. Where if you hit the edge, you're going too far. You can go too far a lot sooner. So if you hit the edge, you have probably gone too far, and you'll get the same thing if let's just say we're too far out here in the red. You start to lose detail in the red. So instead of everything looking pure white, it just looks like just a smush of red, and there's no detail in it. So. I guess if you want that look, it's great, but it's nice to be able to do it, but it's just one of those things. So I don't see very often. I've only on one project ever had an issue where the colors were too saturated and you were losing that detail in it. For some reason, I don't know if it was the camera we shot on, was always in the red channel. For some reason, reds oversaturate a lot easier. And that may just be, it's usually Sony that I shoot on. So that may be a Sony thing, that they just pick up too much red. But when I boost saturation too, the reds seem to boost more than the blues. So just something to keep an eye on for that. Sometimes that works to your advantage, and sometimes it gets in the way. So, because again, a lot of skin tone is on that orange-red line. So you get more, it just focuses on boosting that more. But I've also made people look really beady. So it's not always great. Cool. So normalizing log footage. So there are a few ways to do that. The first and easiest, and I usually recommend it because I think it's just fine, is using a LUT. So we'll kind of show you, this is the same clip, but this one is in log, and this one had a LUT put on it, but no color grading. So you can see how it, let's pull up the graph here. That's what it does. It squeezes all of this down into this little section here. Yeah. And so this clipped off some stuff at the top and bottom, and this has it here, and I can spread out and choose how to use it. And you can do all that manually, but it's kind of a pain. So the best way to do it is I do 3 nodes. On the third one, I put the LUT. And the reason for that is if I put the LUT on the first, it immediately cuts out the information that's over this line and under this line. And then I can't work with it anymore. But if I put it here, you'll notice. So, and you do that, you just right click on the node, go down to LUT and do Sony, whatever you shot. So we shot S-Log3. You see the little graph comes up and it spreads it out. But you'll notice on this one, when I pull down, there's not much up there. on this one, if I pull down on this node, there's also not much on there. But if I go back to this node and pull down, I have quite a bit more before it gets off. Like you can see it's still sitting up there. Then it comes down. So you just get that much more data by doing it that way. So I typically applying it, yeah, you apply it after your corrections. And then I'll generally do more corrections after it as well. But the initial color correction, color matching is going to happen before the LUT. Because you just have so much more information to work with. Whereas the other one would fall apart a lot quicker. Yeah, because you can just kind of see, you know, these are both, I can push this one to the top a little more and I get a little bit more detail and color, brightness, and just that light falling on here than I do over here. I can push that, but it just falls apart a little quicker. So that's the advantage of shooting in log. But you always do your LUT after your initial corrections. And that's the nice thing about the node is I can create all these, put the LUT on, and then go back and do that. So I'm not guessing it. Because if I take the node off and do this, I don't know what it's actually going to look like when I put the LUT on. So you just put the LUT on first, but later down the line. So that's, you know, the way I tend to do it. If I have a lot of time or an extra tricky shot, I'll switch it a little bit and I'll do what's called a manual adjustment. And so in that, instead of a LUT, you would start with your log wheels and push your highlights. This one's really squished down. So you can see it's not doing much here. So I would lower that range a little bit to pick up a little more. And then I would push my highlights up. I'd pull my shadows down to the bottom. So this already looks like a lot more contrasty than the original. But then to get it normal, I would come in to the third one here. And this is where I would do an S curve, but this takes, like, I still struggle to do this. It takes a lot of practice and you use a whole lot of points to manually, because what a LUT is just an S curve that they have pre-programmed that works best with their camera. But you can of course modify it and make your own choices by doing it, but you're doing a whole bunch of these. We're gonna so generally you would pull this over here and then pull this down. So this is basically setting when I adjust these endpoints, the black and white point. And then you adjust the gradations in here. And this is where it gets tricky because now you're choosing the exact transition from a darker shade to a lighter shade. And that's why you almost need a color calibrated monitor to really do it well, or it gets hard to tell if you're making it better or worse. But this is the manual way to do it. You can also, instead of doing the log wheels at the front, you can do a contrast and pivot. I don't like that as much, but it works. Just, you know, works fine to do it this way. And pull that up. And I mean, that's pretty good and that's super quick. And then you do an S curve again. So it works, but I like just doing the LUT because they know, like, this is the number that hits that pulls the most out of our camera. If I were a full-time color grading, that was all I did. I didn't have to do editing. I didn't have to go shoot. Then maybe I would start, you know, getting more into S curves for that. But I'm sure there's people who aren't full-time and do it well. But for me, it's like I need a lot more practice to be able to do it like that for every shot because it's very time-consuming to make all the points.
And the more points you have, the more like control you have over how it goes.
So you make it really smooth. You can adjust the little transitions here and there. So you get a lot of control. It's also very easy to mess it up. So every point is an option to go the wrong direction. So, but it's, you know, it's just a great way. Like I'll do it when I have more time on a project. I'll do it for practice. Just like, okay, I'm going to do this one that way. And, but it is more time consuming. So, and the last way is called color management. And this is something that we're seeing more and more, for a lot of reasons, for future proofing. And then as you know, just there's more and more media everywhere. How do we make, let's say somebody shot something on their phone and somebody shot something on this camera and then they shot this on this camera. We want to put it all together. How do you make it match better? So there's a lot of ways to do that. It's called color management. And you can also use it to normalize your log footage. So there are a few ways to do it in DaVinci. They have their own color management. So you actually hit the settings wheel down here and go to color management. And from there you can hit DaVinci YRGB color managed. And there's a few ways you go about this. Typically, once you do that, if it's a newer camera, like in the last 5-10 years, it'll automatically read what camera it is, and it converts it to everything to the same color space. So most cameras, if they're not shooting in log, are shooting in Rec 709, but their own way of reading it. So it's going to say, oh, I read this reading. This is the reading that hit the sensor out in the field. We're going to convert it to this reading in Rec 709. And they all do it a little different. And what this does is takes it and takes the rod, like the original data, and interprets it all the same. Okay. So that, and it doesn't work perfectly, but it does get your cameras matching a lot better. Yeah. So that's what that does. It's just a good way to kind of keep, it's kind of a quality assurance thing. Kind of gives you a little better quality. But if it can't read it manually, you would come in and choose the LUT. Instead of doing it up here, you would choose it down here. And you're just telling it, hey, we shot on this. Please read this as this. And so that's how the program does it. It's pretty good in here. There's another one that I really like, but it's been hit and miss for me, where on one project it worked really well, and on the other project it lost a lot of data and made it not look as good. And that's ACES, which is the Academy Color Encoding System, which is put out by the people who do the Oscars. And it's supposed to be there, like, we're going to standardize the colors. And so it does the same thing as that, but it's not DaVinci's own proprietary. So it takes a little bit more steps to do it. But same thing, you pick it. Instead of just saying, here's the camera I use, you actually tell it, what camera did you put in? And then what do you want to output for? What that's really nice is, let's say I color graded this for phones, and somebody said, wow, this is so cool. It showed on a movie theater. You can color grade it for that setting, which would be like a P3 or, one of those P3 DCI and one of these standards. And it'll kind of shift it to play for that color standard, because projectors read the color different than a phone, which is different than a TV. And you still have to do a few adjustments, but it gets it most of the way there for you. So it just makes it easier to get it distributed to different channels. So like P3 for projection, Rec 709 for standard def TV, Rec 2020 is the HD standard and HDR. And then of course, if you wanted, you could convert all your footage from Sony to read like an ARRI camera. Still not going to have the same sensor pickup, but it'll read the colors the same way, which a lot of people like. That's like the most popular. People like to put it into ARRI log. Because I think it's got that ARRI look, which it is a little smoother, but it's still not the same as shooting on the camera. But it's nice. So that's what those do. It just kind of makes it, and it's just really future proofing. They have a setting. If you go to the ACCC and then, here it is, AP0 linear, then you can export it to these massive files. That's like 100 gigabytes a second or something. It's just ridiculously large, but that's like the future proof archive. We can adapt this to whatever comes in the future theoretically. ACES hasn't caught on a lot, partially probably because what I experienced, where like there were some issues, but then you get people like Roger Deakins. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's considered like the greatest living cinematographer. He does a lot of the Coen brothers and did 1917. He just makes his own workflow, like his own color managed workflow. So, it's like when the greatest the so-called greatest living is doing his own instead of using the standard. Why would anyone else adopt the standard? Right. So kind of slows it down, but it's a good system to have. And then I don't know if do you edit in DaVinci?
I do. Okay,
cool. Yeah. So if you weren't to edit in DaVinci, if you were editing in Premiere, if you ever want to like switch, a lot of times I'll edit in other programs and then finish in DaVinci. I also edit in DaVinci. I just go all over the place. But they make it really easy because DaVinci was built to like color grade other projects, and it didn't have an editor. So for the longest time, it had to be able to read other projects. And so you would just go here and do timelines import. And you can import an AAF, an EDL, an XML. I don't know what those other are. OTO is like an old audio exchange format, but AAF is typically what like Avid Media Composer puts out. EDL, most programs can put out. XML is what Premiere and Final Cut put out. So you can import that timeline and it'll rebuild it for you in DaVinci, and then you can color grade that. So yeah, it's pretty easy. That's kind of, most of what I have in this class. Do you have any questions or anything particular that you're maybe working on?
I don't think so. I mean, my intention was just to like go back and work on some of the videos that I've already posted on YouTube.
Yeah.
And, go and try to see if I can color them a little bit better.
Yeah. It's good practice.
Yeah. I feel like, so maybe with the nodes, because that's what you were going over when I first came in.
Yeah.
Be a little bit helpful.
Yeah, so some more on nodes. Let me see, where am I? Okay, color page, nodes. Yeah, and I should probably, I would just make nodes and don't tell people how I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I use Option S and Shift S is actually how I learned to do it. I didn't know there was another way until recently.
Okay.
So Option S makes a new node after the current node,
Mhm.
and Shift S makes a new node before. So it goes
Oh,
backwards.
okay.
And then you can also right click and do add node, add serial, or add serial before. You can also do all kinds of nodes. You can do outside. So if you did have a mask
Mhm.
and you color graded the inside of it, and then you wanted to color grade out everything outside of it, you do add outside. And now you can see it used that alpha channel and
I see.
inverted it. We have no mask, so it's completely grayed out, but it would gray out the the section. So, but yeah, and then you can drag them. You can like oh, let's try see if I bypass this one, do that instead if you wanted to.
Just to see.
Now this is going nowhere. Yeah, I feel like, oh, is this one messing it up, or
Mhm.
does that look better? Sometimes I'll do, if I have a really tricky shot, I'll do an edit up here, and then I'll come down and go like this, and I'll bypass, and I'll just come to this one, and then leave those hanging, and then I can come back and test those and go back and forth. Or sometimes I'll even turn them off. So this is the just click to turn off, and I could turn off these three, make a 3 new ones, see how they look, turn them off. An easy way to do that too is Command D will turn off the selected nodes. So you can just do that, so you don't have to click on each one individually.
Right,
But yeah, nodes basically just hold whatever effects you want to put on them.
yeah. Mhm.
I try and do a few of 1 or 2 effects on each one, so again I can isolate what's working, what's not. Yeah.
But then just remember that the third one is feeding from the second one.
Yeah.
So,
Yep.
so
Further
it'll
down you
eventually
go.
Come before it if you.
Yeah,
want it to.
exactly. Yeah, it's one of those weird things where, like, to an extent, it matters what order you do it in, and then sometimes it doesn't. Basically, if you're gonna lose any data, do that later. So, like, if you're gonna apply a lot, if you're gonna take out this, if you're gonna desaturate, do that later down the line. I mean, if your end product is black and white, do that first, because
Right.
there's no point in seeing the others. But if you're just desaturating a little, and do it later so you can edit with everything else ahead of it. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. This was really helpful.
Yeah, good. Yeah. Awesome.